Europe, the old continent, once the absolute ruler of global commerce, now facing a slow, agonizing, and undeniable economic twilight. The economic engines of the West are sputtering. We are looking at stagnation, fragility, and a loss of dominance across the board. Today, we dissect the decline of the big three: Germany, Italy, and France. What exactly is dragging these giants down into irrelevance? Hi, I'm Smart Buddy. Let's analyze the data. The European Union remains a $20 trillion economy, yet something is fundamentally broken. Let's start with Germany. For decades, this nation was the relentless industrial powerhouse, the engineering envy of the entire world. But that model relied on two things: cheap energy from Russia and an endless global demand for traditional internal combustion vehicles. Both pillars have collapsed. Energy prices have skyrocketed, crippling heavy industry. While the world shifts rapidly toward electric mobility technologies, German car manufacturers, once undisputed kings, are now struggling to catch up with agile competitors from the United States and China. Imagine a massive, complex machine running out of fuel. That is the German industrial sector right now, gasping for air. It is not just cars. Chemical plants and steel mills face an existential crisis as operational costs become simply unsustainable for production. Then there is the workforce. Germany is aging fast. A shrinking labor pool means fewer innovators and a heavier pension burden. We call this the demographic winter. Without young workers to drive consumption and tax revenue, economic growth naturally grinds to a halt. Investment is fleeing. Major companies are building new factories in Texas or Shanghai, not in Bavaria or the Ruhr Valley anymore. Germany faces a brutal reality check. Reinventing an entire economic model takes time, a luxury they might not actually have. Now, let's travel south. Italy represents a different kind of tragedy. A story of a spectacular boom followed by endless stagnation. Back in the 80s and 90s, Italy was flying high. Made in Italy was the ultimate global stamp of quality and luxury. But since then, productivity has flatlined. For 30 years, the Italian economy has effectively stopped growing, trapped in a cycle of debt. It is a beautiful museum, but a struggling economy. The debt-to-GDP ratio is suffocating, leaving the government with zero fiscal maneuvering room. Talented young Italians are packing their bags. This brain drain leaves behind an elderly population and a continuously shrinking tax base. Without structural reform, Italy risks becoming a cautionary tale of how quickly a major power can fade into economic obscurity. This brings us to France, a nation torn between its desire for global grandeur and its commitment to a generous social model. France maintains one of the most expensive welfare states on earth. Citizens enjoy immense protections, but this comfort comes at a price. To fund this system, taxes are high and labor costs are astronomical. This creates a challenging environment for businesses trying to compete globally. The labor market is notoriously rigid. It is incredibly difficult to fire employees, which ironically makes companies terrified to hire new ones. Any attempt at structural reform faces fierce resistance. The street protests are not just noise. They are a powerful veto against change. The French government loves to intervene in the economy, protecting national champions rather than letting the free market encourage natural innovation. While the U.S. economy runs on creative destruction, France prefers stability. But in a fast-moving world, stability can look a lot like stagnation. So, Germany, Italy, France, three different stories, but they share a common, worrying thread that binds their fates together. That thread is the innovation gap. Europe has completely missed the digital revolution that has defined the 21st century so far. Think about it. Where is the European Google? The European Apple? The European Amazon? They simply do not exist on the global stage. Europe missed the internet boom. Then they missed the smartphone revolution. And now, they are at risk of missing the AI wave. Why? Because while America innovates and China duplicates, Europe regulates. The focus is on rules and safety, not on growth and risk. Bureaucracy in Brussels is stifling. The GDPR and other heavy regulations make it incredibly hard for small tech startups to scale up. There is also a cultural issue. In Silicon Valley, failure is a badge of honor. In Europe, failure is a career-ending stigma. Capital markets are fragmented. It is much harder to raise venture capital in Berlin or Paris than it is in San Francisco. The result? The brightest European minds move to the US to build their companies. Europe educates them. America profits from them. Life in Europe is still comfortable. The food is great. The cities are beautiful. But this comfort masks the underlying economic erosion. Some economists fear Europe is becoming a massive open-air museum, a place for tourists to visit the past, not to build the future. But the biggest threat isn't technology or regulation. It is something much simpler and harder to fix: time. And biology. Next, we have to talk about the demographic bomb. Europe is dying, quite literally, and the numbers are absolutely terrifying. To maintain a stable population, a country needs a birth rate of 2.1 children per woman. Europe is nowhere near that. Germany and Italy are shrinking. In a few decades, there will be millions fewer working-age people to drive the economy forward. This creates a mathematical nightmare. Fewer workers paying taxes must support a growing army of retirees. The math simply does not work. An aging society consumes less. They don't buy houses. They don't buy cars. Innovation slows down because risk-taking belongs to the young. Migration could be a fix, but it is politically explosive. Europe is torn between needing workers and fearing cultural or social fragmentation. But a shrinking population is not the only problem. Europe has also realized that being rich is not enough if you are defenseless. For 30 years, Europe enjoyed the peace dividend. They slashed defense spending, believing that major war on the continent was impossible. They effectively outsourced their security to the United States via NATO. This allowed them to spend money on welfare instead of tanks. Then, reality struck. The return of war to Europe exposed just how hollow these once great military powers have actually become. Without US support, most European armies would run out of ammunition in days. They lack logistics, intelligence, and unified command structures. Europe has 27 different armies with incompatible weapon systems. It is a logistical nightmare that prevents them from projecting real power. Europe prided itself on soft power diplomacy and trade. But in a world of wolves, soft power offers very little protection. We saw this with energy. Dependence on Russian gas was a geopolitical gamble that failed spectacularly, crippling German industry overnight. Now, there is a fear of repeating that mistake with China. Europe relies heavily on Beijing for trade and critical raw materials. Europe is caught in the middle of the US-China rivalry. They are struggling to define their own independent strategic place in the world. Once, European powers wrote the rules of the global order. Now, they are increasingly becoming rule takers rather than rule makers. Meanwhile, the global south is rising. India, Brazil, and Indonesia are growing fast, challenging the old G7 dominance that Europe relies on. The prestige of the old world is fading. The center of gravity for the global economy has shifted decisively to the Indo-Pacific. So we have stagnation, demographic decline, and geopolitical weakness. Is this the end of the road for Europe's great powers? Not necessarily. Europe has bounced back from worse before. But the window for action is closing incredibly fast. Europe's main bet for survival is the Green Deal. It is not just about saving the planet. It is an industrial survival strategy. By shifting to renewables, Europe hopes to eliminate its dependency on foreign dictators for energy. Energy independence equals economic security. If they can lead in hydrogen and battery tech, they might regain their industrial edge. But China is currently winning that specific race. It is not all doom. Look at ASML in the Netherlands. Europe creates the most advanced machines in human history for making microchips. This proves Europe can still dominate in extreme engineering and complex physics, even if they fail at consumer software and social media. The other solution is deeper integration. A true United States of Europe could pool resources, debt, and military power to compete globally. Economists argue for a fiscal union shared debt. But rich northern countries like Germany are terrified of paying for the debts of the South. This political deadlock paralyzes the continent. They are too integrated to separate, but too divided to act as a single, powerful superpower. Europe must also win the global war for talent. They need to make it easier for skilled immigrants to arrive, work, and stay. Their biggest asset is lifestyle, safe cities, good healthcare, and work-life balance. This can attract digital nomads fleeing the chaos of America. So, we are at a crossroads. Down one path lies the Venice scenario. Europe becomes a beautiful, irrelevant museum for rich tourists. In this scenario, the economy stagnates, the young leave, and the continent lives off the glories and wealth of its past history. Down the other path is a renaissance. A lean, green, unified Europe that leverages its high education and stability to lead the future. For Germany, the mission is to digitize its industry and secure cheap, clean energy before its manufacturing base completely evaporates away. For Italy, the mission is demographic survival. They need to make it affordable to have families again and cut suffocating bureaucracy. For France, the mission is flexibility. Can they keep their social safety net while making their economy dynamic enough to actually pay for it? The uncomfortable truth. The current trajectory points towards the museum. Changing course requires political courage that is currently very hard to find. The world is not waiting for Europe to figure this out. Asia is rising. America is accelerating. The clock is ticking loudly. Have they given up? No. But they are sleeping. And in the global economy, sleeping is just as dangerous as quitting. So, what does this mean for you? For the global economy, let's wrap this up with the final verdict on Europe's future. However, Europe has survived wars, plagues, and depressions. Betting against them completely is usually a mistake. They are resilient, if slow. Perhaps the goal isn't world domination anymore. Maybe the goal is simply to remain a wealthy, stable, and civilized continent. While America chases growth at all costs and China chases power, Europe chases a good life. That is a valid choice. But a good life requires money. And without economic growth, the money eventually runs out. That is the hard lesson ahead. Have they given up? No. But they are managing a decline. They are trying to land a heavy plane with no fuel. Germany, Italy, France, great powers of the past, now trying desperately to find their footing in a ruthless, fast-paced future. What do you think? Is Europe destined to become a museum? Or can it reinvent itself? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the global economy, hit like and subscribe. I am Smart Buddy, analyzing the world. History never stops moving. The only question is, who writes the next chapter? Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Stay curious, stay critical, and keep watching. We will be back soon with more insights into how our complex world works.